Okay, so you want to own a hospital. Picture it. A clean glass tower rising over the edge of a city. Your name, maybe, on a wall near the entrance. Automatic doors sliding open, the quiet hum of climate control, that particular smell of floor polish and antiseptic. Up on the roof, a helipad. Down in the lobby, a marble desk and a wall of donor names. You walk the halls in the early morning and everyone nods. The surgeons, the nurses, the janitor who's been here 30 years, because this is your building, your institution, the place this town runs to at 3 in the morning when everything has gone wrong. And the demand never stops. People are born here. People are stitched back together here. People say goodbye here. Recessions come and go, but nobody cancels a heart attack. It feels like the most durable business on earth, a pillar, a fortress, a machine that prints goodwill and money at the same time. That's the picture. That's what the ribbon cutting and the glossy annual report sell you. Here's what they don't show you. They don't show you that most of the people walking through those sliding doors will pay you less than it costs to treat them. They don't show you the law that forces you to treat some of them for free. They don't show you that a single MRI machine can cost more than a house, that a new record system can cost more than the building, or that a hospital with 1,000 employees and a beloved name can go from full to padlocked in about 18 months. They don't show you that in 2025, the typical American hospital ran an operating margin of about 1.3%, according to Kaufman Hall's National Hospital Flash Report, which means for every $100 that came in the door, a little over $1 was left at the end. Read that again. $1. So here's the reframe, and it's the thing this whole video is really about. A hospital is not really a healthcare business. It is not really a science business, either. It is a fixed cost, real estate and billing business that happens to have doctors and patients inside it. The medicine is real. The margins are made or lost somewhere else entirely. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the sickest patient isn't your customer, why the emergency room is designed to lose money on purpose, why the difference between a thriving hospital and a bankrupt one often has nothing to do with the quality of care, and why some of the smartest money in America has figured out how to win even when the hospital itself dies. Stay with me, because the counterintuitive part in the middle changes how you'll read every hospital headline for the rest of your life. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what a hospital actually is. Because hospital is one word covering wildly different businesses, and if you don't sort them out, every number you hear will be meaningless. According to the American Hospital Association's Fast Facts, there are roughly 6,100 hospitals in the United States, with about 907,000 staffed beds between them. But that single number hides at least 5 completely different animals. Some are nonprofit community hospitals, the biggest group, almost 3,000 of them, technically owned by no one, run by a board, paying no federal income tax in exchange for a promise to serve the community. Some are investor-owned, for-profit hospitals, over 1,200 of them, owned by giant public companies like HCA Healthcare, Tenet, and Community Health Systems, answering to shareholders. And some are government hospitals, county and city safety net facilities, public university medical centers, the ones that catch everyone the others turn away. Then, cutting across all of those, you've got the academic medical center, the teaching hospital bolted onto a university, doing research and training residents. You've got the tiny rural, critical access hospital, maybe 25 beds, keeping an entire county alive. And you've got specialty shops, psychiatric hospitals, rehab hospitals, surgical hospitals that only do the profitable procedures and send the complicated cases somewhere else. Here's the thing, those aren't variations on one business. They're different businesses that happen to share a floor plan. The Rural Critical Access Hospital is essentially a government-subsidized public utility. The specialty surgical hospital is closer to a boutique factory. The nonprofit academic center is a research institution with a hotel attached. So for the rest of this, we're going to focus on the one most people actually picture when they say hospital, the mid-sized, general, acute care community hospital. Call it 200 to 400 beds. An emergency room, an intensive care unit, surgery, maternity, imaging. The workhorse of American medicine, because that's the one where the economics are the most brutal and the most misunderstood. So let's start where every fantasy starts. The cost of getting in. You have 2 doors. You can build, or you can buy. Building is where the numbers stop sounding like a business and start sounding like a government infrastructure project. According to construction cost data from Gordian, the firm behind RS Means, hospital construction runs somewhere around $440 to $455 per square foot on average, and modern hospitals are enormous, often 200,000 to 450,000 square feet. Put those together and a single new hospital commonly lands somewhere between about $88 million and over $200 million just for the shell and the build. Measured per bed, which is how the industry actually thinks about it, the median for hospitals that finished construction in 2025 was nearly $2 million per bed. Some post-pandemic projects have pushed toward $3 million a bed, according to construction consultancy Ancura. So your 300-bed dream hospital? You're looking at, very realistically, $500 million before you hang a single sign. Now, you might think, fine, I won't build, I'll buy an existing one. And existing hospitals do trade. A struggling community hospital might sell for a fraction of its replacement cost, sometimes tens of millions, sometimes less if it's bleeding cash. And that's the first real lesson of this entire business, so let it land. The price of a hospital and the profitability of a hospital are two completely different numbers. A hospital can be cheap to buy precisely because it is impossible to run at a profit. The cheap hospital is cheap for a reason. Hold on to that thought, it's the whole engine of the case study we'll get to later. But let's say you've paid for the building. So far, so good. Here's where the real money starts to disappear, the section nobody budgets for. First, the equipment. A hospital is a warehouse for machines that cost as much as real estate. A single MRI scanner runs roughly $1 million to $3 million, and that's before the specially shielded room you have to build around it. A CT scanner, another $1 to $3 million. A surgical robot, the Da Vinci system most people have seen in the news, is around $2 million a unit, plus service contracts and single-use instruments forever. Fill a hospital with imaging, cath labs, sterilizers, monitors, pumps, and beds that themselves cost tens of thousands of dollars each, and you can easily add tens of millions on top of the building. And every one of those machines is a depreciating asset with a maintenance contract attached, aging out the day you plug it in. Second, the invisible one. Information technology. This is the cost that shocks people, because you can't see it. Modern hospitals run on electronic health record systems, the software that holds every patient chart, every order, every bill. The dominant vendor is a company called Epic Systems, and installing its software is not like buying an app. For a large health system, an Epic implementation can run into the hundreds of millions of dollars once you count licensing, hardware, and the small army of consultants who spend a year setting it up. Even for a single mid-sized hospital, the software and its rollout can cost tens of millions. You are, in a real sense, buying a second hospital made of code. And it never stops needing money. Third, the paperwork that has legal teeth. Before you can treat anyone, you need licensure from a state, and you'll want accreditation, usually from an organization called the Joint Commission, because without it, Medicare and most insurers won't pay you at all. In many states you also can't just build wherever you want. About 2/3 of states have Certificate of Need laws, which mean you have to prove to a government board that the community actually needs your new hospital or your new MRI before you're even allowed to buy it. That's a legal, regulatory, and lobbying cost, paid in lawyers and years, before a single patient is admitted. And fourth, the one that quietly defines everything, the emergency room. Because here's the trap. In 1986, Congress passed a law called EMTLA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. In plain English, it says this: if someone walks into your emergency room, you are legally required to examine and stabilize them, regardless of whether they can pay. You cannot ask for a credit card first. You cannot turn them away. You built the most expensive room in the building. You staff it around the clock with the most expensive people in medicine, and the law guarantees that a meaningful share of the people who use it will never pay you a cent. Which brings us to the heart of this whole thing. The one mechanism that, once you see it, recontextualizes every single number we've talked about. Slow down here, because this is the part almost nobody outside the industry understands. In a normal business, you provide a service, you set a price, the customer pays it. A restaurant decides what a steak costs. A hotel decides what a room costs. Now, here's where the hospital breaks every rule you know. A hospital does not meaningfully set its own prices, does not choose most of its customers, and often does not get paid by the person it's treating. Let me spell that out. Yes, hospitals have a list of prices. It's called the charge master, and it's the source of those insane bills you've seen, the $40 aspirin, the $80,000 procedure. But almost nobody actually pays those numbers. They are a fiction, an opening position. What a hospital actually collects is whatever it has negotiated, in advance, with each insurance company, and whatever the government decides to pay for patients on Medicare and Medicaid. The patient is not really the customer. The insurer is. The patient is more like the cargo. And here's the mechanical consequence, the thing that runs the entire business. The single most important number in any hospital is not how many patients it treats. It's not even how good the doctors are. It's the payer mix, the blend of who is covering each patient. Because the same appendectomy, the same broken leg, the same delivered baby pays radically different amounts depending on which card is in the patient's wallet. So let's look at how the money actually comes in, because it arrives in layers, and only one of them is really the business. The top layer, the profitable one, is commercial insurance. Private, employer-based plans. According to analyses of Medicare data, private insurers pay hospitals, on average, around 189% of what Medicare pays for the same inpatient care, and even more, around 264%, for outpatient care. That is the layer that keeps the lights on. Patients with good employer coverage are, bluntly, the ones the whole system is quietly built to attract. The second layer is Medicare, the federal program for people 65 and older. And here's the first gut punch. According to the American Hospital Association, hospitals are paid only about 82 to 84 cents for every dollar it costs them to care for a Medicare patient. Read that again. On the average older patient, the hospital loses money on the treatment itself. 2/3 of hospitals are paid less than cost by Medicare. The third layer is Medicaid, the program for low-income Americans, which historically pays even less than Medicare, also below the actual cost of care. And the fourth layer is the self-pay and uninsured patient, where, thanks to EMTALA, you're often providing care you will simply never be paid for at all. Stack those together and you get a staggering national picture. The AHA estimates that underpayment for Medicare and Medicaid alone reached about $130 billion in a single year, 2022, with Medicare accounting for roughly $100 billion of that shortfall. And on top of the government gap, hospitals have provided, by the AHA's count, close to $750 billion in uncompensated care since the year 2000, care delivered for which no payment ever came. So now you understand the counterintuitive engine. It is not treat more patients, make more money. For huge categories of patients, treating more of them makes you lose more money. The real business is a negotiation business. Your profitability is decided in a conference room, months before the patient arrives, when your administrators sit across from an insurance company and fight over rates. That's not medicine. That's leverage. And it's why hospitals have spent the last 2 decades merging into giant systems, because a system with 20 hospitals can force an insurer to the table in a way a lonely community hospital never could. Now, against that fragile revenue, run the costs. Because the bleed is relentless and it is mostly fixed, which is the deadliest word in this entire business. By far the biggest expense is labor. According to the American Hospital Association's Cost of Caring report, workforce costs make up around 60% of a hospital's total expenses, and nationally, hospitals spent more than $1 trillion on their workforce in 2025. Nurses, doctors, technicians, cleaners, coders, security. And during the staffing crisis of the pandemic, hospitals got a brutal lesson in what happens when they can't hire fast enough. They had to rent nurses from travel staffing agencies at rates that, by some analyses, drove contract labor billing up more than 200%. Then come supplies, gloves, implants, sutures, around 19% of expenses, and drugs, around 9% and rising fast, up over 13% in a single recent year. And then, underneath the medicine, all the costs of simply being a giant building that can never close. A hospital cannot turn off the lights, can't let the temperature drift, can't power down the operating rooms overnight. Utilities run around the clock. Malpractice and liability insurance costs a fortune because you are in the business of high-stakes outcomes. Maintenance never stops. Property taxes, unless you're a non-profit with an exemption, are enormous because you're sitting on a massive, prime piece of real estate. That word, fixed, is the killer. Most of your costs don't shrink when you're half empty. The building costs the same whether it's full or quiet. So your entire financial survival rides on volume and payer mix, two things you don't fully control. Which is exactly why this business is so dangerously volatile, even though it looks like the most stable thing in the world. Here's where it gets frightening. A hospital's margin is razor thin in a good year, 1, 2, maybe 3%. Historically, even healthy hospitals ran only 4 to 6%, and lately far less. So there is almost no cushion. A modest shift in the payer mix, say your town's biggest employer closes, and suddenly your commercially insured patients become unemployed, uninsured patients, can flip you from a small profit to a real loss almost overnight. A change in government policy, a cut to Medicaid, a new competitor across town skimming off your profitable surgeries, any one of them can tip a hospital that looks fine into a hospital that's quietly dying. And this isn't theoretical. According to the Cecil G. Shep Center for Health Services Research at the University of North Carolina, well over 150 rural hospitals have closed or stopped providing inpatient care since 2010. The healthcare advisory firm Chartis estimates that today, nearly half of rural hospitals are running negative operating margins, and hundreds more are vulnerable to closure. These are not badly run businesses full of lazy people. They are businesses with almost no margin for error, operating in places where the payer mix is stacked against them from the start. Which brings us to the story I promised you. Because the single clearest lesson in this entire business isn't in a spreadsheet. It's in a building in the middle of Philadelphia. Hahnemann University Hospital was old. Its roots went back to the 19th century. By the 2010s it was a large, teaching, safety net hospital in Center City, Philadelphia, training hundreds of medical residents and treating an enormous share of poor and uninsured patients. Which meant, by everything we just discussed, its payer mix was brutal. Lots of Medicaid, lots of uninsured, not nearly enough of that profitable commercial insurance. It had been passed around before. It was once part of a nonprofit empire called a HERF that, in 1998, collapsed into what was then the largest nonprofit healthcare bankruptcy in the country, buried under roughly $1.3 billion in debt and losses reportedly running $1 million a day. The for-profit giant Tenet Healthcare bought the wreckage and ran Hahnemann for years. Then, in early 2018, Tenet sold it. The buyer was an investment firm led by a businessman named Joel Friedman, operating through a company called American Academic Health System, in a deal reported at around $170 million that also included the Children's Hospital next door. And crucially, this is the part that matters, the hospital's operations were placed in one company, while the valuable land underneath it, that prime real estate in the heart of downtown Philadelphia, was effectively separated into different ownership. At first it looked like a rescue. New owner, capital investment, promises to preserve the mission. So far, so good. But the underlying math never changed. That terrible payer mix kept doing what terrible payer mixes do. By the spring of 2019, according to reporting from the Philadelphia Inquirer and others, the hospital was losing somewhere between $3 and $5 million a month. The new owner burned through 4 CEOs in about 15 months. And then, roughly 18 months after buying a hospital that had stood for over a century, they announced it was closing. In the summer of 2019, Hahnemann shut its doors, throwing out thousands of workers and hundreds of medical residents, and pulling a major safety net hospital out of a city that badly needed it. The operating company filed for bankruptcy. But the land, the Center City real estate, was a different story, and that's the lesson. The critics, and eventually members of Congress, looked at that deal and saw something that wasn't really about medicine at all. They saw a distressed hospital whose operations could never turn a profit, sitting on top of land that might be worth far more as condos and offices than as a money-losing hospital. Whether or not you believe that was the plan from day one, and there was a long, messy bankruptcy fight over exactly who controlled that real estate, the structure told the story. The medicine was the losing business. The dirt underneath it was the asset. And that is the hinge into the last idea, the one that separates the fantasy from how the money really works. Because if a community hospital, run straight, makes 1 or 2% in a good year and can die in 18 months in a bad one, then why does anyone smart want to own hospitals at all? Here's where it gets interesting. The sophisticated money is rarely playing the game you think it's playing. It's not really trying to win on the treatment. It's winning on everything around the treatment. Some win on real estate, owning the land and the buildings and the medical office towers that cluster around every hospital like a small city, and collecting the appreciation and the rent, sometimes through a real estate structure entirely separate from the hospital that could fail without touching the property. Some win on scale and leverage, building systems so large that insurers simply cannot afford to leave them out of a network, which flips that all-important negotiation in their favor and turns a 2% business into a durable one. And some win on the tax structure itself, the nonprofit model, where you pay no federal income tax and no local property tax on that enormous parcel of prime land in exchange for community benefit obligations, while your executives are paid like the leaders of the multi-hundred-million-dollar enterprises they actually run. And the smartest operators quietly move the actual medicine out of the expensive building entirely. Here's the move: the most profitable care, imaging, outpatient surgery, lab work, the stuff with good margins and good payers, increasingly happens in outpatient surgery centers and clinics the system also owns, where costs are lower and the patients are healthier and better insured. The big inpatient hospital keeps the expensive, money-losing, legally required work, the emergency room, the intensive care, the uninsured, while the profit gets harvested next door. It's the same trick as the case study, just legal and permanent. Separate the asset from the obligation. So let's put real numbers on it, the way an owner actually would, and I want to be clear this is a realistic illustrative scenario, not a specific real hospital, built from the ranges we've been discussing. Picture a 250-bed community hospital pulling in, say, $400 million a year in net revenue. The good year, the local economy is strong, the big employers are hiring, so your payer mix is rich, plenty of commercial insurance paying well above cost. You run an operating margin around 3%. That's about $12 million left at the end of the year. Enough to reinvest, replace an aging MRI, pay down debt, look like a genuine success. The good year feels like the fantasy was true all along. Now the bad year. Same building, same doctors, same beds. But the region softens, a major employer downsizes, and a chunk of your commercially insured patients slide onto Medicaid or into the uninsured column. At the same time, your labor costs jump because you're renting travel nurses to cover shortages, and drug costs climb double digits. Your revenue barely moves, but your payer mix quietly rots and your fixed costs don't care. Now you're running negative 2%. That same $400 million hospital just lost about $8 million. Nothing about the medicine changed. Nothing about the building changed. The mix changed, and the mix is the business. The good year and the bad year are separated by a swing of maybe 4 or 5 percentage points of margin, and by decisions made in insurance negotiations and government budgets you mostly don't control. That's the whole thing. That is what it means to own a hospital. So go back to the beginning. Go back to that gleaming tower, the helipad, the sliding doors, your name on the wall, the machine that looks like it prints goodwill and money forever. It's all real. The demand is real. The prestige is real. People really are born there and saved there and will run to it at 3 in the morning when everything has gone wrong. But the building was never the business. The medicine was never really the business, either. The healing happens in the rooms. The survival is decided in the negotiation, in the payer mix, in the tax status, and in the value of the ground the whole thing is standing on. The hospital isn't really the business. The billing, and the land underneath it, is.